All right, so a little bit about me for those that aren't familiar with what I focus on. So first of all, I've been a realtor for 15 years, still selling actively. And over time, personally and professionally, been evolving my focus towards the investing side of things. And today's topic is on the 1 to 4 unit rental property analysis, whether you're looking to buy something yourself or you're looking to consider a passive investment or partnering with someone else. I think this will help you get a more keen eye for how to evaluate an opportunity and watch out for the pitfalls, in particular where expenses that you may not realize are going to creep up, certainly not going to be advertised by most agents or the owner of the property. So we're going to cover broad range. I will stop periodically for questions. Feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. You should have that option on here somewhere. So let's go into just a little bit about my current background. This is my company, Timber Run Capital, that we use for syndications, for joint ventures, typically for larger buildings. And I welcome you to visit. It's gotimberrun.com. The main thing here is joining the investor club. It sounds intimidating. All it means is that it allows us to connect with each other, for me to learn what your goals are. It might be you want to buy something, and if I can help you in that capacity as a realtor, fantastic. You might know someone that owns a property, 1 to 4 units or larger, that is seeking options on what they can do, whether they want to sell it, hang on to it in the long run, get a feel for what it's worth. I'm happy to help with all of that. And of course, I might be the buyer for that property too. And in particular, for those that are looking to potentially invest passively, where you might have a full-time W-2 job or you run your own business, and that's going to take up the majority of your time. You don't have the time to roll up your sleeves, seek properties, to become the manager of the property, to screen tenants, all of that stuff. But you want to get involved in real estate investing. By joining the investor club here, you can input your basic information. You don't have to answer all the questions, but it allows us to then connect. I have to connect with you in order to invite you to any opportunities I have down the road. It's just the rules and regs from the SEC. So I welcome you to do that. There is absolutely no obligation. It's just for you and I to have a conversation, and happy to help however I can. So that is gotimberrun.com. All right, let's get into today's topic. So I used a 4-unit property. This property has already been on the market and sold. So we're going to run through as if we were analyzing this property and when it was for sale. And what we have here is a 4-unit property in Westchester. It's just outside of kind of what I would consider the borough. It might be in the borough, but it's not in the heart of it where you would step out the door and walk downtown. But what I'm seeing is a typical offering memorandum or advertisement of the property. You see some basics. There's the price, $775, the bedroom and bathroom count. So we have a 4-unit property. It's like, great, now what? We have the price, we have the rents, and just some other basics and some photos. So I'm getting a feel for the condition. Seems above average for the area, decent condition. Let's see what else we have. We have what's called a rent roll. So this shows, and this is the basic information you want to receive, a rent roll and the financials of the property, or what's called T12, which is the trailing 12 months profit and loss statement, so that you can get a snapshot of what the building, how the building is performing today. And then we're going to project out what we feel we can get the building to, whether the rents can be bumped up, expenses can be brought down. So we're going to poke some holes in this. Let's look at this. And this was in the market in 2021. If you remember 2021 compared to, this is 2 years ago, where were rates in 2021? A little more attractive than they are today. So we're going to, again, base it on rates back then, and we can see what we underwrite it at and then look at what it sold for. Because quite frankly, I forget. So let's see here. We have our rent roll. You can see the in-place rents. Great. Financial statement here. This is for, well, it looks like this agent broke down the current, or what are called in-place financials. So you have your income based on the rent roll multiplied by 12 months. That's your gross revenue, 73,000 and change. The expenses that the owner is reporting. And one thing that we'll learn quickly with most opportunities is that a lot of expenses are missing. So an owner, when they're selling, maybe not intentionally, but we'll try to scale back the actual expenses they paid out of pocket to make the building look as good as possible. The first thing I do in my mind is I look at the what's called expense ratio. So I take the total expenses, in this case, $15,000, divided by the gross revenue of 73,000. And what is that? 20-something%? Let's do some quick math here. And if anybody is super good at math, just let me know. 15,251, 73, 692. That's 21% expense ratio. Absolutely impossible. I can tell you right now, for a typical building where the landlord is in particular paying some of the utilities, which they are. So right away, I'm like, all right, there's probably some aspects of the expense side of things that are omitted here. And we're going to do some sleuth work here and figure out to paint a more realistic picture of what to expect. If we based our valuation on a 21% expense ratio, the price that we think we could pay for that stream of income is going to be artificially higher than what it should be. Because as we start to incur those expenses that aren't on this sheet here, your cash flow is going to dwindle or be negative. So we take a close look at gross rents or gross rents. So what I'm looking at for rents is, well, can I get them higher? Is the potential? I see the condition based on the photos I saw. Seems to be in pretty nice condition. So there's not much. Again, I haven't toured this yet, but just based on the information I have, I'm not going to do much here. I mean, these floors look beautiful. The paint looks fresh, recessed lighting, etc. So more of a turnkey opportunity, meaning that there's not much work to do. Might be some touch-ups here and there as people turn over and move out. But what I'm looking at are the basics here. Expenses are low. Let's dive into the spreadsheet that I've created for you. All right, so again, highlighted in green are the cells that we're going to want to fill in. So for this opportunity, we have the asking price and our offer price, which for now, I'll just keep it at the asking price. 4 units. Another thing I could do in my mind, looking at these buildings on a regular basis, is price per unit. That's kind of a guide that more experienced investors use that are very familiar with specific locations. So Westchester, for a newer building in the borough, could easily be in the $200,000 to $300,000 per door per unit range. I don't know about this one. I just see it's 198. Feels a little bit high, but let's keep going. Now, keep in mind, the nice thing about 1 to 4 unit properties is that you can get conventional financing. You could use an FHA loan. So I'm going to use 20% as the down payment. When you get to 5 units and above, it's considered a commercial property. You're not going to be able to get a traditional conventional loan from a mortgage company. You're going to get more of a commercial loan. And typically with commercial loans, you're looking at 25% down or greater. But with a 1 to 4 unit property, it's considered a residential property. So you can get as low as 3.5% on FHA financing, maybe even 3% for some conventional products. But I'm going to use 20% to avoid the PMI or private mortgage insurance that you would typically incur if your down payment is less than 20%. But just know that you have flexibility, especially if you're in a position where you can house hack, where you can live in one of the units, collect the rent on the others. It's just a really smart strategy. If I can go back in time and do it again, that's exactly what I would do in my younger years. I'm doing it now, but I would certainly do it when I was younger as well. All right, so we have the price, the number of units, 20% down payment. Interest only is not as relevant for residential properties, so I'm going to leave that at 0. In the commercial world, interest only means for the first 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, plus or minus, you could be only making interest only payments on the mortgage and not including the principal. And that's something you could do while you're rehabbing a property. When you take over ownership, your cash flow is going to be a little leaner. You might have higher vacancy. You're going to be making improvements to the building. So that lower debt service or mortgage payment helps you weather that storm, maybe keep some positive cash flow coming in. For the purposes of this 4 unit, that's turnkey. We're not worried about that. And you're probably not going to get interest only on a residential loan anyway. Repairs, we don't know. The photos look like that's one important thing is when you're looking at a building, obviously you want to account for what rehab the building may need. So if you're thinking, all right, my in-place rents today are these numbers here, $6,100 total. I'm not going to go through a comparable rent survey right now, but one thing you're going to want to do, and you can easily do on your own with the websites, the tools that are at your disposal, Zillow.com, Apartments.com, Realtor.com, all of those consumer-facing websites, and even Facebook Marketplace, you can start to get a feel for what other properties similar to this. You're looking for properties that are similar in vintage or age. You're looking at similar proximity, same school district ideally, and get a sense for 3 to 5 similar rental comps to be able to back into what is the projected market rent that you could achieve once you take over ownership. So we're just going to make up numbers here because I didn't do this part of it. But let's say we can get rents up $200. Probably not unrealistic in most situations. I don't know why there's such a disparity here between the rents. It could be different. We have well, one's a 3-bedroom and 3 or 2 bedrooms. There's one good reason right there. But let's just bump these up to it. Now, this is the non-scientific way. We're just going to do it for purposes of this conversation. All right, so our current monthly rent is $61.42. We think we can get it up to $69.42, about $10,000 more a year. All right, so now we have our price, unit count, down payment. We have our repairs. Let's just keep that 0. Operating reserve would mean, especially in a partnership, you just want to have some cash that's just sitting there where it never goes below that amount in the account, just as a protection, a buffer for unexpected, unforeseen expenses primarily, or vacancy. Now, our assumptions here. This is all formulated through the spreadsheet here for you. I'll kind of use what are my benchmarks. So average rent growth, if you have been paying attention the past 5 years or so, rents have exploded. I mean, we're talking 5 to 7% a year, sometimes more. And that is starting to temper a little bit as we approach this slightly changing market. But as a conservative rule of thumb, I use 2% rent growth, 2% expense growth, which also might be unrealistic as of late. Expenses have also skyrocketed with inflation being as high as it has been. Again, just for purposes of simplicity, let's just keep it at 2% rent growth, 2% expense growth. Average turnover. So how many times are tenants going to elect to terminate their lease and move out? I don't mean eviction. I mean, just naturally, they're going to want to move on from the building for whatever reason. So for 2-bedroom, predominantly 2-bedroom or larger buildings that I've owned over the years, I've seen about a 25% turnover ratio. It's higher for my 1-bedroom buildings, closer to 35%. So this is 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom. I'm going to assume 25% turnover. Turn cost means I separate what it costs me to prepare a vacant unit for the next resident from the general repairs and maintenance line item, just because there's recurring costs that I'll incur for those, such as cleaning, touch-up painting, minor repairs, things like that. Now, sometimes you can retain some of the tenant's security deposit to offset that. But even with that, it costs more than you might expect to turn a unit. And there's a couple of property managers and other investors on here, and I think you can relate to that. It's not always the case. I use a rule of thumb of $550 out of pocket for my properties for each turn. And a reserve deposit, this is just money you set aside from your income each year that you just pile up in your account, just preparing for future capital expenditures, repairs, etc. All right, and then for pet, this is other income. So if you are a pet-friendly landlord, which I am, the only restrictions I have are the number of animals. My insurance company might have restrictions on dog breeds, so you might want to check with your insurance company if they do. And I might just limit it to number of cats or the weight of the dog, whatever. But it's an upfront fee, non-refundable of $350. It's not a deposit. I actually collect that money upfront, and it's commonplace in our area here in southeastern PA. Pet rent I've seen range from $15 to $35. I charge $25 per pet per month. If the building has some sort of laundry hookups, where I have a 4-unit building where I rent washers and dryers to tenants if they want, or they could bring their own, and I can collect $25 for the pair per month. Parking fee, not really relevant for 1 to 4 units, but you might have a 4-unit with 1 parking space. Well, that gives you an opportunity to potentially charge $15, $25, $35 a month to whoever wants to be the lucky one that rents that parking space. So just thinking creatively on ways that you can add income aside from just the rents. Utility reimbursement. There's a way to approach this where you set up what's called RUBS, Ratio Utility Billing System, which is less relevant for a building this size. But long story short, if there's certain situations where you might be able to charge back a flat fee to the tenants for utilities. If it's a landlord-paid utility building where you're paying the heat and water, for my 14-unit building, I charge $50 a month per tenant for water and sewer reimbursement. So again, another way to offset the out-of-pocket. All right, so we have all that done. Let me pause just for a moment. Any questions so far on this analysis? All right, feel free to raise your hand or just chime in. All right, so good. We have the assumptions in place. We have our assumptions for market rent. Now let's go into the current profit and loss statement, or pro forma. We're looking at pro forma. Just means you're projecting what the financials will look like going forward. So in place, gross rents, we want to factor in vacancy. Typical rule of thumb is 5% vacancy, meaning obviously somebody's moved out, you haven't brought the new tenant in yet. Lately, for the past 5 years, I haven't had much of any vacancy, but I'm still, when I'm buying something, I'm going to factor in 5% at least, more if I need to do a lot of rehab to the building. Because when you go to sell this, odds are the buyer is going to factor it in, so you might want to factor it in too, make sure you're not selling yourself short. Concessions, loss to lease, and bad debt. Concessions are if you're offering a discounted rent for upfront. It's not very common right now, but in a slower market, landlords might offer breaks on rent. They offer last month's rent free or something. The bad debt is people that just simply aren't paying their debt, and loss to lease is that basically just means how where if the rents are under market. But for simplicity's sake, 1%, 2%, 0% in some cases, where I'm going to just factor in that at some point someone's going to fall behind on rent payments, or if the market slows, I might need to offer concession. Other income, as of now, there's nothing reported from the owner. So they just have rental income, but they have no other income. And then I just punched in all of their current expenses. I think I filled in some blanks, and over here on the right here. So when you're reviewing the sheet for something that you're looking at, we have I put some rules of thumb in here. So advertising, likely none. For 1 to 4 units, you can advertise for free. Obviously, if you have a property manager or you're using a realtor to list your rental, there would be separate charges for that. But for the purposes of getting your property advertised on the different websites, they typically are free. You can pay for Zillow, but you also has a free version of Zillow, for example. Apartments.com, it's free for 1 to 4 unit buildings. All right, the contract services is just a fancy way of saying recurring services that occur to the building: lawn care, snow removal, pest control, any janitorial if there's common area, common hallways. So what I did here, again, just you're going to fill in the green highlighted cells. So if you have a lawn, which let me see if this one does, I forget. Yeah, this one does have a lawn. So in their financials, as an example of, well, they do have landscaping. So landscaping and snow removal, they're saying it costs them $13.20. Let's see what we think. Number of lawn cuts, I usually use 24 as my rule of thumb. That's 4 cuts a month for 6 months, plus or minus. What's it cost to cut that lawn? Something like this, probably be 35 to 50 bucks. So I'm going to be conservative, say $50 per cut. Extra lawn care, if you have a spring cleanup, a fall cleanup, might be an extra 500 bucks combined. Snow removal, does this have, it has a parking lot or driveway, but it's not much. But again, for a multi-tenant building, you're probably going to be outsourcing to a third party the snow removal. Odds are you're not going to have a tenant doing it. If it's a single family, you could dump all the utilities and all the lawn care and the snow removal on the tenant. That's a positive of a single family house. But let's say it costs, I don't know, 100 bucks. And there's 5 snow events over the course of a winter, unlike this past winter. And we're not going to worry about pest control, and there's probably no common area in this setup because it's just direct entry into the building. So no hallways, no common entrance. All right, so let's see what that spits out for us here. We have 2,200. So they gave us an actual of 1,320. I'm projecting 2,200. I'm going to use my projection. This is based on my experience. Now, if you can do this yourself and save the cost, super. If you think you could do it for less, just play around with these figures until you get comfortable. But there's one area that we're already higher than what the owner is projecting. The oil, gas, and electric lumped together based on the number they gave us here for utilities, which that just seems really low. I mean, typical water bill will run $40 to $60 per unit per month, which to use the low end of that, 40 times 4 units times 12 months is $1,900. So typically with a 4-unit building like this, and I don't know, maybe the tenants are paying, maybe it's sub-metered to each unit, I'm not sure, but typically it's landlord paid for the water, but they're showing a total of $2,700, which if you're paying heat and the water, that just seems low. But I'm just going to go with that because I haven't verified. General and admin, this is typically like if there's a rental license fee or an annual inspection with your municipality. In Westchester Borough or in Westchester, there is a small fee of $43.50 per unit times 4 units. So there's that. And that was not included on the P&L from the seller. Insurance, again, rule of thumb, as of late, that the amount of insurance has gone up pretty significantly, about 10 to 15%. per year for the past 2 to 3 years. On average, we're between $400 to $550 per door. So I'm using 550 to, again, to be conservative as a starting point. Plus, in this case, you want to always verify, is it in a flood zone? And they make that abundantly clear because they have flood insurance here. I'll just use their current figure for that. So I'm between the property insurance and the flood insurance, I'm at $4,500 for insurance. Legal and accounting, I outsource my bookkeeping to my accountant. If I have a separate entity that I'm purchasing a building with, I'm going to need an entity tax return at the end of the year. There's going to be costs associated with that. That's a more buyer specific charge that you're not going to see on a seller's profit and loss, which makes sense, but it's definitely a real life expense you want to account for that building. So I'm saying $750 for that. Now you could do the bookkeeping yourself. You could do your own tax return. If you are and you're competent enough to do that, obviously eliminate that. But the legal side, if you do have to face an eviction, typically an attorney will want a retainer of $1,000. You may not use all of that, but that's what it would cost to outsource the eviction process entirely to an attorney. So I'm just saying, I'm not expecting that in this location, but I'm going to account for these potential charges. Real estate taxes, they are what they are. For larger buildings, there might be a risk of the school district appealing after purchase. They spot appeal you. If you paid way more than what they thought the building was worth, it opens the door for them to appeal and try to increase your taxes. For a building that's 1 to 4 units, very rarely is that a risk, even if your purchase price is well above what the fair market value is from the eyes of the county tax assessor. So we're just going to use the current figures. Trash removal, that seems pretty reasonable. Management fee, did they have one? No. So right there, again, if you're going to self-manage, I still recommend you account for a management fee. And the purpose is when you go to sell this, some investors will include a 5% management fee on when they go to buy it from you. So it makes sense. Now, if in a competitive market like this, even I will sometimes, if I'm going to self-manage it, scale it back. I still might charge the entity a small management fee, but I might be 3% instead of 5%. In real life, though, if you're hiring a third-party manager, it might cost you 6, 7, 8, 9% of the rents for to hire a property manager for a building this size, plus leasing commission on top. So we have leasing commission here. So if you hire a realtor or have a property manager, they're going to charge you half a month's rent to a full month's rent each time they lease out one of your units. If you do it yourself, you can eliminate that charge. Repairs and maintenance, I just use a percentage, just as a rule of thumb. Sometimes I see a per unit assumption, but I usually, in real life, for a building that's in this condition, would expect somewhere in the 2 to 4% range. I'm using 5% of the collected rents as my assumption. And again, that turnover cost in between tenants, just an additional charge for painting, cleaning, minor repairs. Water and sewer is a bit of a question mark. So if we did decide to pursue this, we're just going to assume that the utilities they gave us are accurate, even though they feel like they're low. And I'm setting aside $250 per door each year towards replacement reserves for future improvements that the property will inevitably need. So rather than take this money as cash flow, or if you have partners pay it out, and then boom, your roof goes bad. Now you're not expecting that. This is what this is for. Water heaters, your furnace, your heater, whatever. It's there for a rainy day. All right, so now let's get down here to, again, we're thinking 2021 rates on a 1 to 4, a residential loan. I don't know, what were they, 4%? For an investment property, it might be a little bit higher. So let's say 4.5%. Amortization on a residential loan will be 30 years. It'll be 25 years for a commercial bank loan. So that's another positive to the 1 to 4 unit space. And now we look at the cap rate is the cap rate is how you basically value what the stream of income is for a commercial building. It's less relevant for a 1 to 4 unit building. You're really looking at what other 4 units or 1 to 4 units have sold for similar to this. I didn't perform that study, so we're just going to back into how do we get the cash on cash return we want. So what I overlooked here was, so first thing, step 1, which I forgot to cover. Let's go back in time. Set your criteria. So you want to know what it is you're looking for so that you can say no more readily to opportunities that are outside of your criteria scope. So what locations do you want? How many units are you looking for? What is the vintage, which is a fancy way of saying age of the building? Will you say no to 100-year-old buildings? Do you only want 2010 or later? Whatever, you have to decide what's best for you. Class neighborhood is a bit of a sketchy, subjective concept to me, but for those that are, I've been asked, what's the definition of Class A, Class B, Class C? These are just some ideas for you. Try to keep it objective. But again, and the location and the building can be different class. You might have a Class A building and a Class B location. It just means, what is the age? How many amenities are there in the building or nearby or on site? How close are you to shopping and to transportation? What is the condition of the building? Obviously, what is the crime rate relative to other areas? And demographics as far as median income for that vicinity within a 1 mile radius. I mean, it just gives you a guide here, but you're going to set your criteria. And the last one here is my minimum cash on cash return. So cash on cash means what is your cash flow each year, net at the end of the year, compared to what you invested into the building. So let's say for me, for the larger apartment buildings, or when I'm thinking of my passive investors in the deal, most of my investors are looking for somewhere in the 6 to 8% cash on cash return. So I'm going to use for a 4-unit building, I personally would be looking for at least 8% on my money that I invest. So we're just going to use that as a guide. So based on everything we just covered, we have our asking price, all the details, the rent that's there, the expenses, plus the expenses that we filled in that we feel are more realistic. Now we're at, again, look at this 38% expense ratio as opposed to the 21% expense ratio that the owner had provided here. So big difference. And my rule of thumb for expense ratio, somewhere in the 30 to 50% expense ratio is the rule of thumb. And that's after you get the rents up to where they could be. So if rents are super below market, you might even have an expense ratio. I saw one last week that I underwrote a 10-unit that was 70%. So 70% of the gross rents that are received are going out the door in expenses, which is scary, but it's actually an opportunity because that means in that case, the rents were severely below market. It was a paid off building. The owner was still cash flowing well, but it gives us an opportunity to get the rents up to closer to market and get that expense ratio down closer to where it should be. So that's the in place with our adjustments. Over here is our pro forma. So let's now jump to where rents could be. And we fill that in. And as the rents go up, your expense ratio goes down, but you're still in that 30 to 50% range. And we break it down to based on a 4.5% interest rate, 30-year amortization, we're at a 7.29% pro forma cash on cash return, meaning this is what it will be, it could be once the rents are up. But in place today, it's 2.16%, not very exciting. This is common. So for a value add approach, meaning that you're looking for how you can add value to the building, either increasing rents or decreasing expenses or some combination therein, cash on cash to start day one typically will be much lower than where it could be. So that's not uncommon. Now, if this was truly a turnkey, let's say it was 2015 built, rents are already full market value, there's very little repairs to make, your cash on cash day one should be similar to what it could be in 2-3 years. So hopefully that makes sense. But I'm looking at, all right, I want to get this to at least over 8%. So I know I can't pay $795. So let me just drop it. Now you're backing into a price that you could pay based on all your assumptions to get you to 8%. Well, there's 7.99 at 775. How about 770? And boom, there I am. So I'm thinking, all right, I'm somewhere in that 770 plus or minus range. And that will get me to 8%. And all I need to do is get my rents up a couple $100. And that's just with very few improvements needed based on the photos I see. Obviously, I would tour this building and verify, and if I needed to update the rehab component or the repair component, I would. And let's say I went and I'm like, all right, this building needs $25,000 of work. How does that impact my cash on cash return? Well, now I'm below 8 again. So this is how this all works together. So now you got to go back to your price and work backwards to get back to 8%. So it's very uncommon for a building not to need some work. Could be the driveway, the parking lot, the windows, who knows? Always going to be something. So I'm going to keep the 25,000 in there. And now I'm at, there you go, 8% on a price of 740. I hope you followed that. Now let's see what it sold for. This building sold for, I have no idea. I think it's down here somewhere, 770. Okay. So it sold for 770. And we were at 740. We were at 770 coincidentally with no repairs factored in, but that's unrealistic. So you can see why there's going to be times where there's going to be someone that overpay or not overpays, pays more than you're willing to pay. But again, this is based on a sound approach to evaluation, accounting for repairs that a lot of people overlook. And I could tell you from firsthand experience, these expenses are real. Don't rely on what the broker, realtor, owner says to you. Use this spreadsheet as your guide, these rules of thumb, and I hope that's helpful. All right, so that is how to evaluate a 1 to 4 unit building. I hope that was helpful. What questions do you have?
Hey, Sean, how do you handle oil specifically when you can't meter it out, or if it is just a one unit? Do you allow the tenant to fill the tank? Do you fill the tank and bill them back? Like, what do you think is the best way to handle that?
For a 1 unit?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I have an offer out on a 10 unit that has oil in every building, and one of them is, or two of them are single family. So my thought would be, it's tough. Oil's tricky because the tenant understands that the volatility of oil, at least the perception of the volatility of oil. But my goal for that would be, if I'm not going to switch out the heat to a forced hot air electric system, then I would look to put the tenant on budget billing, knowing that if, like right now, the rate for oil is $4.75 to $5 per gallon is what most people are locked in at for this season. That might be a lot to ask for the tenant. So there might be some cost sharing there. But I would try to dump that on the tenant if possible for a single family property.
Makes sense. Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. But that might impact what rent you can get. It all works together, you know. Obviously, all else being equal, for a building that is the landlord pays for all utilities, a tenant would be willing to pay more rent than if the tenant was shouldering more of that expense themselves. So that's part of your analysis when you're looking at comparable buildings nearby. You want to try to figure out who's paying the utilities, because that will impact what you can fetch the rent.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Who here
Hey, Sean.
owns? Yeah,
Hey,
go ahead.
Sean, it's Bishara. Thanks for putting this together. This is
You're
cool,
very
man.
welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, this is good. Um, your spreadsheet is slightly better than mine. You're very strict with your like, do you feel that by the time you add payroll and leasing and you bake in legal and accounting and then, some of the, property management at 5%, do you find that you almost price yourself out of the market? Your standards become so high in a competitive market where you actually nothing checks out.
Yeah, I do. And there's two ways to approach that in my mind. Number one, it's like, oh, well, I mean, eventually that gap between where the seller wants to be or where other buyers are willing to pay and what I'm willing to pay will get closer and make it more competitive for me. On the flip side, Bashar, it's I'll do this analysis and I'll talk to the broker or the agent or the owner, depends on who the other party is, and get a feel for where I stand to the competition. In this case, if they indicated, well, the other offer is closer to 770, I'm like, all right, so then I'll kind of go through it with a fine tooth comb. If it's self-managed, I'll knock it down to say 3%, or in the past, I would not charge myself anything, but typically I'm doing joint ventures. So if you're doing this 100% by yourself, then you could be a little more liberal with saying, well, listen, I'm not going to charge myself, that didn't change anything. I'm not going to charge myself any type of management fee. And now boom, you could be way more aggressive on price. So yes, I'll go through each item. I think some are just non-negotiable.
Right,
The
right. No, I
insurance,
get it. So this is the
yeah,
best case scenario, and then you go down from it a little.
exactly. Yeah,
And
and
do
it's
you
like
find? Sorry, go ahead.
good.
No, I was gonna say, given that you would syndicate this deal or you'd have a joint venture in it, do you feel that if this checks out, if you're targeting an 8% cash on cash return year one, do you feel that it will check out in a joint venture scenario where you have investors and they have certain expectations? Like, how would this, and maybe that's not the scope of this conversation, but maybe you can speak about it
Yeah.
quickly. How would this evolve into a joint venture, and would these numbers, like the deal, the way you have it in front of you right now, let's say you did buy this at 750, would this check out in a joint venture scenario?
So typically with a joint venture or a larger syndication, it would be, in a sense, that much more difficult to make the numbers work, because now this is a project level return, meaning this is the total return for the 4 unit building as a whole. Now, if I have partners and I'm offering my limited partners, the people that are simply writing a check, I might offer them 70% of the deal. So the LP return or the partner level return is 6%,
Mhm.
not even. So it would require me to pay a little bit less. But
Yeah.
that's, I think the typical buyer for this size building would just be on their own, or maybe have one partner and would just look at more the project level returns. But in the event where there is true passive investors, yeah, it would be that much more difficult to compete. That's why for me, like the larger deals, it's most operators of a 40-unit apartment building are set up in some similar fashion. It might be a joint venture, but there's going to be partners typically that are helping to fund, and there's going to be some breakdown. But I think for this, I would be looking at the project level. But yeah, you're right. You're exactly right. If there were other investors.
Thanks.
Yep.
Where's the
Any other-
time machine? I'd go back and buy this for 770.
Well, look, let me show you some, because this is a good question.
Right? For the next 7 years or
Oh,
so.
it's all hindsight, but look at it today. Like I'm getting quotes of 6.5% on commercial bank loans.
Yeah.
I don't know what a residential investment property loan, probably 7%, 6, somewhere in the same ballpark. But look at your cash on cash. Today's rates. See the difference? So it was 8.18, and now all else being equal except for the rate, it's 3.86.
Right. And now adjust your purchase price to make this back to 8, then that seller, there's no way in hell they're gonna, no, it will be less than 700.
Yeah. See, well, you can do quicker math in my head than your head than I can. This is literally, it's got to be a faster way than just backing into this, but this is like the fun part of the exercise when I know I'm almost at the finish line.
Yeah, but isn't that crazy? Like if you're the seller of that
It's a
property,
$100,000 difference.
yeah, it's huge.
So yeah, I put that in perspective. It's like, that's the conversations I'm having. And even as a potential seller on some stuff, it's like, even I have to realize, wow, it's not a year ago. So I'm not even at 8%, and I'm $100,000 less on the offer price compared to when this person paid. And that's why it may not happen right away, but as your interest rates increase, the values effectively have to come down for it to be appealing to investors, for them to generate the same return or the type of return that they want. Now, I've seen return expectations for my investors trickle down a little bit over the past few years. What used to be 10% minimum cash on cash 5 years ago is now 6 to 8 once the building is humming, like once the rents are up to where they could be.
Right. But think about it. Put that same money in a savings account right now at close to 5, right?
Yeah.
So it makes it so, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's why I think the return expectations might start to creep up. And that's why you're going to have this period of time where sellers' expectations, investors, there's just going to be a prolonged gap. But I also see that there's going to be opportunity for something here and there. At least that's my mindset.
Oh.
Any other, and I'll share this template. I'll clear it all out for you just so you have a blank template. I just created this, like this is from the syndication version. If you have any questions on this, but feel free to play around with it, share it. There's no copyright. I don't care. Just have fun with it. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. I will send you an email today or tomorrow with the recording and with this template. And I appreciate you coming. I'll have another webinar on something next month and another in-person multifamily investing meetup in June. That'll be probably in the King of Prussia vicinity. I'll let you guys know on that. So if you want to connect at all, feel free to ping me, email me, go to my website, whatever, and I will look forward to speaking with you. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thanks, Sean.
Sean, thank you.
Thank you.